In a quiet corner of northern England, hospital staff once referred to her simply as the Silent One. She had no visitors, no known family. For decades, her name barely appeared in any reports, just a bed number in a locked psychiatric ward. Most of the nurses didn't even know why she was there. Some assumed she had a severe mental illness. Others thought she was dangerous. But the truth was far more heartbreaking. Margaret Ellis had been placed in that hospital when she was just 7 years old. She wasn't violent. She wasn't mentally ill. She simply had autism, undiagnosed, misunderstood, and ignored. And because of that, she lost 45 years of her life behind locked doors. How could something like this happen in modern Britain? And more importantly, how did no one notice for so long? Hit like, subscribe, and let's go. Margaret Ellis arrived in England in 1967, a quiet 5-year-old girl from a small West African village. She didn't speak much, but she watched everything with wide, curious eyes. After losing her parents, she was placed in a children's home on the outskirts of London. Life there was simple: meals at fixed times, group activities, bedtime at 8. Margaret often sat alone, humming softly and playing with the corners of her sweater. She didn't cause trouble, but she also didn't fit in. Teachers said she had learning difficulties. She didn't respond to questions and avoided eye contact. No one thought to ask why. Back then, words like autism weren't part of everyday conversation. So when she turned 7 and her behavior hadn't changed, the staff made a quiet decision. Margaret was transferred to a hospital for special care. It was meant to be temporary. Just a few weeks of observation, they said. But those weeks would become years. And Margaret's voice, already quiet, would fall completely silent. When Margaret was 19, something happened that changed how the hospital saw her forever. One afternoon, during a routine group activity, she lashed out, scratching another patient on the face. No one knew exactly what triggered it. Maybe it was the noise, maybe a sudden touch. But that single moment, just a few seconds long, became a turning point. The staff wrote it down as violent behavior. They labeled her unpredictable, unstable. From that day forward, Margaret was moved to a more secure wing of the hospital. Farther from the common rooms, farther from the little routines she'd grown used to. To Margaret, the change was confusing. She didn't understand the rules and no one explained them. Her world became smaller, quieter. The nurses stopped speaking to her casually. Activities were replaced with observation. And while she couldn't express it in words, something inside her knew. Something was different now. Something had shifted. Over the next few years, Margaret's world continued to shrink. The scratch incident followed her like a shadow. Though she never repeated such behavior, the label of dangerous stuck. Staff rotated frequently, and with each new face came the same conclusion. Margaret didn't speak, didn't engage, and had a history of aggression. No one questioned it. Her care plan was minimal, just containment. She was moved to a single room with a locked door and monitored through a small window. Meals were left outside. She ate alone, sat alone, existed alone. Sometimes, she would hum softly to herself or rock back and forth to fill the silence. Over time, she was removed from all group activities. Decades passed. Staff came and went, patients were transferred or released, but Margaret remained. To most, she became part of the building itself, like the wallpaper or the old chairs in the corridor. She was still young, but the world had quietly decided she would stay hidden. In 2013, a young psychologist named Emily Carter joined the hospital staff. Fresh from university, Emily was eager to make a difference. While reviewing patient files, she came across Margaret's. An outdated, sparse record with no clear diagnosis and no recent assessments. Curious, Emily spent time observing Margaret quietly, noticing something no one else had. She wasn't violent or unstable. She was simply different. Emily began to dig deeper, researching autism and its manifestations in adults. She realized Margaret had likely been misdiagnosed and misunderstood for decades. With careful notes and growing conviction, Emily raised her concerns with the hospital's management, pushing for a review of Margaret's case. This was the first step toward change. a small voice challenging a system that had long ignored one quiet woman. For Margaret, it was the beginning of hope. For the hospital, the start of a reckoning. As Emily delved further into Margaret's history, she uncovered a troubling truth. For nearly half a century, Margaret had been held in the hospital without a proper diagnosis or any real treatment. The system had failed her completely. Records showed no evidence of dangerous behavior beyond that one incident, yet she remained locked away. The realization hit Emily hard. How many others like Margaret were trapped in similar circumstances, victims of outdated practices and misunderstanding? She felt a mix of anger and sorrow, not just for Margaret, but for a system that allowed such injustice to persist unnoticed for decades. Emily knew this wasn't just a clinical failure, it was a human one. And with that knowledge came a heavy sense of responsibility. She had to act, not only for Margaret's sake, but to prevent this from happening again. The fight for justice had only just begun. Despite Emily's efforts, the hospital administration resisted change. Officials argued that Margaret was too fragile to live outside the institution, fearing the risks of releasing her after so many years. They insisted the current system was safest, even if it meant keeping her locked away indefinitely. Emily faced a daunting choice: accept the status quo to avoid conflict or push harder against a bureaucracy that prioritized control over care. Each meeting grew more tense, with some staff questioning Emily's qualifications and motives. The weight of decades of neglect was heavy, but so was Emily's determination. Margaret remained silent, unaware of the battle unfolding on her behalf. As months passed, Emily's appeals were repeatedly denied. Funding cuts meant fewer resources, and some senior staff openly dismissed Margaret's case as too complicated. Worse still, Margaret's health began to decline, her isolation taking a visible toll. One cold winter morning, a careless mistake left her unattended for hours. When Emily finally found her, Margaret was weak and confused, barely able to respond. It was a stark reminder of how fragile her situation had become. For a moment, hope seemed lost. The system that was supposed to protect her had instead trapped her in neglect. Yet Emily refused to give up. She reached out to local advocacy groups, determined to bring public attention to Margaret's story. A small spark was ignited, proof that even in darkness, change was still possible. After months of relentless advocacy, Emily finally secured a meeting with regional health authorities. With detailed reports and heartfelt testimonies from care workers, she made a compelling case for Margaret's release. The officials agreed that Margaret's continued confinement was unjustified and approved a carefully planned transition to supported living. In early 2022, after 45 years, Margaret walked out of the hospital for the first time in decades. It wasn't just freedom from walls, it was freedom to rediscover herself. The quiet woman who once faded into the background began to bloom. With gentle support, she found joy in simple things: soft scarves, walks in the park, and even the company of new friends. For Emily, the victory was bittersweet, a reminder of how easily people can be forgotten, but also proof that courage and compassion can restore lives. Since her release, Margaret's life has slowly transformed. Though the years of isolation left deep marks, she now experiences the warmth of community for the first time in decades. She enjoys simple pleasures, chatting with neighbors, choosing her own clothes, and listening to music. Each small step is a victory, a reclaiming of the life that was once stolen from her. Yet, the shadow of the past lingers. How many others like Margaret remain unseen, locked away by outdated systems or misunderstanding? It's a difficult truth that challenges us all. If you learned someone close to you is trapped in such a situation for years, how would you respond? Would you fight to change the system or feel powerless against it? Share your thoughts below. Sometimes honest conversations are the first step toward real change.